Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of the Brotherhood of the Arrow and Sword. Joining me today is Master Marcus Boyer, a retired member of the Brotherhood. Today we're going to be talking about longbows, so stick around. Hey folks, welcome back. So again, like I said, today we're going to be talking about longbows and the parts of a longbow with Master Marcus here. And I've got a little bit of a project for you if you're up for it.
All right.
All right.
What do we got?
So my Osage longbow has a string that almost gave up the ghost at our last event.
That is a pretty rough looking string.
Yeah. What do you think about making a new string for this?
Sure, we can do that.
Okay.
Definitely.
So what do we got to do?
Well, let's take a look at this string, what we have here.
Okay.
So this is what is called a Flemish twist string, which means the string is made, this one is made with 2 bundles. You can make them with 3 bundles. We're going to do a 2 bundle, that's more traditional.
Okay.
And this one is a double loop string, which is pretty common today, but I don't believe historically is particularly common. So we're going to make this a little bit more accurate for the Brotherhood by making a single loop.
All right, so what does it mean by double loop? Is it because it's looped on both ends?
So there's a loop on each end.
Okay.
And historically, it was not uncommon for bows to break.
Yeah.
And if you make a bowstring with 2 loops, it will only fit that bow or a bow with exactly the same measurements from what's called knock to knock. So this little set of grooves here that the string sits in, right, that's called the bow knock or the limb knock. And then there's one on the other end. So if you were to break your bow in battle, let's say, and there are extra bows that are brought along, you go grab that bow, and if it's not the same length, that string is no longer useful. So as far as I understand, more commonly, you would have a loop on one end and just a twist on the other end that you would tie onto the lower limb so that you could adjust that string and use it on multiple bows that were close to the same length.
Okay.
So that's what we're going to do.
All right.
We're also going to make a string without a jig because while there are modern jigs to make your strings look super pretty, likely they didn't use them back then, and they definitely wouldn't have wasted the effort to carry them on campaign. So all you really need is a little space to lay out your string, a couple pins, or you could even use a couple friends to put their little fingers up, at a certain distance apart, so you can just loop your string around and get your basic length.
Let's hope they have a long arm reach.
Yeah.
Well,
maybe 2 friends, one at one end and one at the other.
Well, if one actually happens to have 2 friends, that would be impressive.
All right.
So, all right. So now we've set up to make the string. What are we using for material?
We are going to use, let me grab a piece here.
Okay.
This material called B55, which is a modern material. Right? It's made by a company called BCY.
Okay.
This is what's considered a traditional for modern shooting, a traditional bowstring.
What is the material itself? Like a polymer?
Yeah, it's a polymer material. So there's a couple different string materials out there that aren't, I would say, they're certainly not period. These are all synthetic materials. But period materials, for example, silk or linen, probably the most common. Hemp, there's some indication that there was hemp used. They're great materials, but there's a couple drawbacks. One, the materials themselves tend to be very thick, and so in order to have a large enough string to support the weight of the bow, that string won't fit on your arrow nock anymore.
Right.
So you would need a really big arrow. And for war bows, they had really big arrows, so they could afford the really big strings.
Yeah, because they're firing. This is a 65-pound pole bow.
Right. So
they're firing anywhere from up 90 and up.
Right.
Right.
Yep. And on the field, probably very commonly 130 to 140.
Right.
Somewhere in there. So when you're doing demonstrations, while those strings are pretty interesting looking. They're not super safe, and they really don't like to get wet.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're going to use a modern material that doesn't care about the damp. It doesn't stretch when it gets humid.
Right.
It's a lot safer to use, but you do need to have some stretch in it, especially with bows like yours, which is made of all wood. When a bow is released, that string is going to snap taut, and any energy that it hasn't pushed into the arrow is now going to have to be absorbed by the bow.
Right.
And if you have a string without any stretch whatsoever, so much energy goes into the bow that the bow can break. And that's why they say that you shouldn't, people use the term dry fire, but you don't really fire a bow. But you should never release the string without an arrow on it. That's going to spell doom for most bows, especially all wood bows like this one called a self bow.
And we've actually seen that happen before. So
sure, it happens.
And especially since, as you folks know, we do a lot of our presentations out in kind of pretty all kinds of weather.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's a good thing to have on this bow.
There are other materials. One that I don't know that they actually make the specific material anymore, but the term that you hear thrown around is called fast flight, which used to be a common material, and I don't even know if it's used anymore, but it's kind of like saying tissues or a Kleenex. You know, that term has been so
generic,
commonly thrown out there. This is not fast flight. This bow would not do well with that kind of material. So I don't recommend ever using fast flight on bows unless they are made of modern materials, or in particular that at least the limb tips have been reinforced to take that extra pressure.
Like my 1932.
Right. Yeah, you wouldn't. You could probably do that.
Right.
But I don't think there's a reason for it. The extra speed that you might get out of a slightly less stretchy string is not worth the stress you put on the bow.
You know. Okay, so how do we start off with making the string?
Well, the first thing we need to do is determine how long the bow is, and we've already done that. When I say long, we're really going from the knock to the knock. Anything beyond the knock is not working.
So basically, what, the top of the knock or the bottom of the knock?
Some people like to measure from the back, could be the front, but the difference in here with both limbs is maybe 3/4 of an inch, so it's not that important as long as you're consistent. So I usually go from the valley of the knock to the valley of the knock.
So that brings up another good question for the viewers out there who've actually never really dealt with a longbow or a bow in general. You talked about the back of the bow and the front of the bow.
Sure.
What are the parts?
So this bow is, as I said before, called a self bow, which just means it's made of one piece of wood, nothing glued to it.
In fact, they even left in the knots from the original
you can see
piece.
This one's got a little bit where they worked around the knot, and it's been left a little, they call it leaving it proud. It's a little thicker here to give a little bit more stiffness where the bow might have been weaker where there was a knot.
Right.
They cleaned the back, so when you're holding a bow to shoot, the side facing away from you is the back.
This is the back.
Right, and the side facing you is called the belly.
Okay.
Okay.
The belly of the beast?
Yeah, the belly of the beast. Now, bow wood, not all woods make great bows, and some woods will make certain kinds of bows and not other kinds of bows.
And this one's made out of Osage.
Okay, and Osage is one of probably the 2 or 3 best bow woods.
And we always hear about
yew. Of course, yew makes a terrific bow.
Yew meaning Y-E-W, not U-Y-O-U.
Yeah, and yew is found both here in the States and in Europe, whereas as far as I understand, Osage is only found in the States.
Right.
This is a pretty dense wood, and it has the characteristics, as yew does, to make a self bow. So when you are pulling a bow, the back of the bow ends up bending, and that stretches the cells in the wood, and so that's under tension. And on the belly side, because it's bending toward you, these cells are in compression. Some woods can do one or the other. So if you have a wood, let's say Ipe, for example, Ipe is not particularly good in tension, but it's very, very good in compression. So you wouldn't want to make a self bow in general, at least not one of any weight out of Ipe. But if you glue wood or material on the back of the bow that is good in tension, say hickory, then now you have no longer a self bow, you have a laminated bow. But you can take an otherwise great tension wood and make a bow out of it by putting, a compression wood, and make a bow out of it by putting a tension wood on the back.
And I do have a couple of those.
Laminated bows.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
So then you have your limbs, so the two ends, and in this bow you can see that the handle is a little thicker here.
Mm-hmm.
So this handle probably doesn't bend very much, and so we have what's called the working limb, the part that bends. And then we have this centerpiece, and where it fades down, it's literally called the fades, into the bow. And this one has a little leather piece on the side that is functioning as what in a modern bow we would call a riser.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That allows you to know where to put your hand, and it's something to maybe rest the arrow on. This one's really small, so it's more kind of an indicator of where you should be holding the bow. Traditionally, probably in the time period of the Brotherhood, there wouldn't have been a grip. Okay, and
it would have just been a solid piece of wood.
One solid piece, nothing glued on. It wouldn't have been left thick in the middle,
mm-hmm.
and it would have bent in your hand. In fact, when you draw it, you can feel the bow bending in the palm of your hand.
Right, right.
And so that's...
And I've fired a couple bows like that before.
Yeah, they're not as comfortable to
No.
shoot. There's a lot more hand shock because there's less mass here, so your hand has to absorb the energy from that bow when the string goes taut.
And the more powerful the bow, the more shock that goes into the hand.
Yeah, to some extent.
Yeah.
To some extent. Part of it has to do with how well the bow is made.
Right.
The heavier the limb tips are, the more hand shock you're going to feel.
Mm-hmm.
So if these can be really narrowed and thinned out and light, you're going to get less hand shock and a faster shoot. The heavier the limbs are, the more energy the bow has to put into straightening itself out, rather than pushing the arrow. So the lighter the limbs are, the more the energy can then be used to push the arrow very quickly. And that's called cast. So cast is how fast the bow throws, how fast and far the bow throws the arrow,
mm-hmm.
pushes the
mm-hmm.
arrow. So you have an upper limb and a lower limb, and most of the time they are not perfectly symmetrical. One limb is going to be slightly shorter than the other because you're holding the bow pretty much in the center, which means that the arrow is actually slightly above the center.
Right.
And that makes the top limb a little stiffer because it's shorter, and the
So
bottom
like
limb is a little longer.
So sort of an exaggeration would be those Japanese style,
The Yumi bow.
the Yumi bows,
Yeah.
where the top limb is like...
Really long, and therefore it's going to be pretty whippy.
Right.
And the bottom limb is short, so it would naturally be stiffer.
So these are more symmetrical.
Yes, this is
Compared to
pretty
that.
close. There are some bowyers that make them dead-on symmetrical, so both limbs are exactly the same weight. And if I would guess, if I strung this one up and I measured the distance between the string and the bow, that one limb is going to be slightly closer to the string than
Right.
the other.
That's
that
usually
makes
how
up-
this one works out. Now, you mentioned bowyers,
Mhm.
and Marcus Boyer.
Right.
What does a bowyer do?
A bowyer is somebody who makes bows.
Yeah. So Cars makes the bow like you're just talking about.
Right. So this kind of bow, you would have cut down the tree, using some wedges or such, maybe quarter it, maybe even more than that, depending on the initial diameter.
So they would have cracked it, put the wedge in, and with a hammer just
Yep.
cracked it that way.
And that way it allows you to follow the shape of the bow. So you'll see this one has a little bit of a twist in it.
Yep.
And that's fine, as long as you follow that shape. And when you're done, the string, when you've strung the bow, is right in the middle of the bow. You don't really want it to be to the left or the right.
Mm-hmm.
You would think you would, because with a bow like this, the arrow would like to travel right down the center of the bow.
Right.
But it can't, obviously, because the bow's in the way.
Which creates what we call
Archer's paradox.
Right.
So the arrow has to bend in order to fly straight with a bow like this.
So if you actually seen an arrow fired from a longbow, you'll notice that
It's going to fishtail.
right, and it's going around down
Just a few
the
times.
target,
It should
yeah.
fishtail as it goes to the target. And generally, if it's not fishtailing, then it's not going to go where you aimed it.
right.
Okay, it's probably far too stiff for that bow. And if you're a righty, a really stiff arrow is going to fly left of the point you're shooting at. And if a bow is too whippy or too bendy, it's going to fly to the right of your aiming point. So it's important to try to match the arrows at least somewhat to the draw weight of the bow. and that in an arrow is called spine. But that's a whole other video that we can do. We can
Right,
talk
right.
about
Now, who
arrows.
makes those arrows?
A Fletcher.
A Fletcher.
And I also am a Fletcher.
Right.
And I'm a string maker, so I do all aspects of it. And we can do other videos, and talk about other kinds of
don't worry, folks. You'll see other videos about all this other stuff, but we're gonna get right back to the bow and the string and so forth.
So we've already measured this one, and it is from the valley of this knock to the valley of this knock, 59 inches.
Okay.
So we want to add about 20 inches to the string because as we twist it up, it's going to shorten a bit. And we need some extra material to make the loop. So here's a string that I have off of another bow.
Okay.
It's in a little better shape than your old string.
Now this is also
a double loop.
Right.
So, and I don't own the bow this used to go to anymore. I don't actually own a bow that this fits on anymore, but I use it for demonstrations. So this came up and then looped over and came back in. So we need extra material. So when we flip it over and we bind it back in, we're not going to end up with a string that's too short.
Right.
The next thing we have to do, and I can't, for the audience, really help a whole lot with this because you really need to know your bow. I need to know the draw weight, possibly the kind of bow, if it's a fiberglass bow or if it's using other modern materials. Those bows are a little faster and a little stronger than a wood bow. They might require more layers of string in the bundles that we're going to make. So we're going to make 2 bundles. With a bow like this, on average, 12 to 14 bundles of B55, 12 to 14 threads in the total bundle.
For this bow
for
right here.
this bow, right?
Okay.
12 or 14. It's pretty odd that people do odd numbers. You can, if you're doing 3 bundles, which just makes kind of a little bit rounder string. It doesn't affect much in the shooting, if anything. Some people think it's prettier, or you can make, a 3-colored string, if that's your thing. We're going to stick with 2, and I think we'll do a 14, which is a little safer for this bow.
Right.
And it's going to give a little more bulk, and we're going to bulk out the knot, the loops anyway, so that the force of the string when the bow goes straight, goes taut, is going to be cushioned a little bit, and that will also make it a little safer on the bow. So what we'll start with, we're going to make a bow that is, a string that is white and brown, and we're going to go over these tools here. This also is B55. You never ever want to mix your strings because each string has its own amount of stretch. And if you have one string that is stretchier than the other, then the less stretchy string is going to take the brunt of the force when the bow goes taut. We're also going to need some wax. You could buy a modern wax, bowstring wax. This one is from Boning. It's fine, more bonding.
What the text tight?
Text tight, and I use that sometimes, but I prefer just a nice lump of beeswax.
Now, where does one get this material?
The wax?
Or any of these?
There are numerous sites online, or if you're lucky, near you, you might have a place. Cabela's probably would have string material. Here in New Hampshire or on the Maine border, the Kittery Trading Post, Coyote Creek Outfitters. But online, I really like Three Rivers Archery. Lancaster Archery is excellent. If you're overseas, there are a number of great companies over there. Richard Head would be one. Crick Archery is another. And I've ordered from all of these different companies. I've been very satisfied with all of them. And we'll tell you, at least here in the States, the customer service in all of them has been excellent. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to say now is if you have a bow and you're trying to decide what string material to use or how many threads in a bundle, you might want to give them a call and they'll tell you what you want to do. Some bowyers like really thin strings, and that is kind of a modern craze because these strings are much, much stronger than the linen and the silks of the past. And by making a lighter string, literally the bow can move that string more quickly, and some people get really caught up in the speed of the arrow, feet per second.
I've seen that actually.
Yeah, I don't find that it's that important, and that really thin string, you're always chancing the string breaks, and a broken string could mean a broken bow. So we have our wax here, and this, we'll see this white string actually has some wax in it. It's pretty well waxed. Strings need to be waxed. We just talked about beeswax, like this old lump here. Some strings have some wax in them, and you can tell this one does. So if I smooth this in, it holds. This string, same company, for whatever reason, doesn't really have a lot of wax in it. See how I can't smooth it in? It doesn't hold. Doesn't hold very well. So we're going to have to make sure we get some good wax in this string when we make it. What we have here is just a little makeshift jig. You can use any two little points that you can wind your string around. And on the other end of the table, we've already measured out the distance between this little nail and the nail over there, 20 inches longer than my knock to knock. So this was 59 inches knock to knock. Now we're at 79 inches. So I'm going to take this string over here. I've already done the brown bundle, and I'm going to show you why we need to wax that in a minute. I'm just going to tie this off. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, just so it doesn't pull away when we're looping it around. You want to keep constant tension on the string, so I'll walk over here. I'm going to loop it around there, and I'm going to come back. So there's 2 threads in my bundle. Okay, we're not counting one loop. That's literally 2 threads. So there's 3. Now we have 4 threads in this bundle. Six threads, and I'm going to stop at this other end here because I want 7 threads in this bundle right here, and I have 7 threads in my other bundle. So total now we'll have 14 threads. Start by cutting this down at this end. And I'm going to keep the tension on, come to this end. You can use a knife, you can use scissors, it doesn't really matter. Pull it all up, cut it there. You can already see as I smooth this bundle down and how rigid it stands. This one has some good wax in it. That's going to make it a lot easier to make this string. And I'm just going to gently smooth it down to make sure all of the strings in the bundle are laying in together. This brown one over here, not so much. You know, I try to smooth it together and it just doesn't have a lot of wax in it. So it wants to separate really easily. So we're going to add some wax. We just want to really pull the string right through the wax. You can see all these little grooves I've cut in my little ball of wax here. And now that I've done that, you can see now it's holding its shape, and that's going to make it a lot easier to make this string. You don't have to wax the whole length. We'll add wax to the rest of it later. And I'll come down here. This one looks pretty good. I think I added a little wax when I first took it off. There. There we go. See, now it's holding itself. So that's a pretty good indicator you have some good wax in that string. Now that we've done that, we can get started in actually winding this string together. We've got our bundles waxed as best we can at the moment. Now we want to begin twisting our string. We can see here, you can really see the difference between a waxed and an or poorly waxed bundle. I am going to throw this over my shoulder for the moment to get it out of the way. We're going to want to come about 10 inches down this string. Now my span from pinky to thumb is about 8 inches, so I'm going to come to about here, maybe about 10 inches. It doesn't have to be too exact. And we're going to work our way toward the ends of the string, not toward the middle of the string. In order to get this nice tight wrap to not pull itself apart, we're going to make this very much like a rope maker twines rope. We're going to take this top bundle and I'm going to twist it away from myself, and then I'm going to wrap it back toward myself. Okay, so wrap it away, back. I'm going to flip this over. Hopefully you were able to see that. And I'm going to do it toward the end here. Okay, so I'm going away from myself and then twisting it back to myself. Away and back. Away and back. Okay, and you'll notice I'm moving my fingers down to hold this little spiral as I go. We're going to come down here. There is no set number of twists. What we want to do is get enough to make a loop. I forgot to put those in. Well, we don't need to do that. This is a down and dirty field string anyway. Okay. That should be plenty of loop, and we can actually test it here. Yeah, there's a lot of room in that loop, so that's fine. And now to make that nice permanent loop, what we want to do is separate out these bundles. We're going to lay the white into the white, and we're going to lay the brown into the brown. And we're going to continue what we were just doing, but now we're going to be moving toward the middle of the string. So I'll get this nice and tight. Pull it up in there. There. And just repeat that process. So we're going to bring these strings out, and when you're twisting the string, don't forget that it's twisting itself down here. So every once in a while you're going to want to separate those two bundles. And if you're doing this in a place where if you're in your wood shop or whatever and it's dusty, or you're outside and it's dirt on the ground, you want to be careful. You don't want to get a lot of dirt in this waxy material here. So we're going to twist away and pull forward. Twist away and then pull back to me. All right. Twist away until we get maybe 10 inches or so down from the fork in this loop. And because we're doing these twists, these strings want to untwist, but as the bundle wants to untwist in one direction, the entire string wants to untwist in the other direction. So it ends up binding itself down and preventing it from unwinding. There are fancier ways to do this, like the modern string jig. Each one of these strings in this little bundle here would be a different length by about a ½ inch. So when you get to the end of the bundle, they lay in a little smoother. There's no need for that. That is completely aesthetic. But if you like it, you can, after you cut your bundles using the jig over here, you can just offset all the strings a little so you don't get quite as severe drop off. So here we're right at the end, okay, and we're going to continue doing what we're doing. So I'm going to hold it and continue spinning away and then pulling toward me. Spinning away, pulling toward me. Get some good tension on that string. And you can see here we've got our loop. These little tails can be cut off later on, and you can melt the edges with a lighter. But there's plenty of room here, so they're not going to unwind themselves. There we go. Just keep alternating. You do not want to do this the whole length of the string. You'll end up with kind of a, you can feel the ridges in here. You can see them literally as I twist them up. That will make for a not a very smooth place to knock the arrow. So that's why I said we only want to come about 10 inches down. And we're not there yet. Right? But we can take our tape measure and set it out here. Right now from the fork, we're at about 6.5 inches, so let's go a little further. These are approximate lengths. If you were to stop at 8 or 9 inches, it's not going to hurt anything. You just want to have enough twists so this bundle holds itself together. So here we are, end of the loop. We're just beyond our 10 inches, so that's fine. We have our top loop. That's what we just made. You can see all the nice little twists in here. And that's going to fit on the top limb right in that knock. And when we make a string for a bow like this, in general, we want to make the string about 3 inches shorter than the knock-to-knock length. So we're going to take this limb, flip it over here. I'm going to bring it down about 3 inches. Measure it with the tape measure here. So there's right about there. And I'm going to come to this other end, and if I'm worried that it's going to slip, I'm going to use a little clamp like this. And hold that in place. Yeah, that'll work. There's our 3 inches. We're going to come all the way down to this end. And this is where we want the other loop to be, right here. Okay? So we have plenty of string. If I were outside or if I were in the field, I wouldn't have a clamp like this. I would find a branch, a little something. Here I still have my pin. So I'm going to put that on the pin, and I'm going to come all the way back. I don't know if you can follow me here, to where we're at. Make sure these bundles are not too twisted up. And right now they're looking, because I spent time separating them, and you can see way up here that even though I've stretched this out, it's not unwinding itself. And that's because of that twist forward, pull back, right? It's bound in. So we're going to separate these out, and I'm going to come all the way to about 8 to 10 inches from where I want my loop, okay? And I am going to do that same process we did at the other end. Make sure you're winding it in the same direction, okay? So here we are, and we're going to go all the way to the end of the string. So I'm going to sit back down here so you can follow along. And just like we did before. So we're going to spin away and loop forward. Right? And we're going to be twisting. Now, do a few of these, and then I want you to stand up just to make sure you're doing this right. Okay? Stretch out your string. And are your spirals going in the same direction? Because if they're not, the string's going to unwind itself. Okay? So here we're seeing the white is winding counterclockwise around the string, and on this end it's winding counterclockwise, so we're doing it properly. Okay, and let's just continue down. Because these strings are short, it's going to be a lot easier to keep them from binding themselves up. this brown one not wanting to hold itself. Does not make this any easier. Some people have asked me in the past, do you want to heat the strings at all when you're putting your wax in? You could. It is a little chilly in this room. So if you're outside in your shop or out on the field, if you're hunting and your string broke, and you might keep a couple small spools in your kit, especially if you're going out for a whole weekend. You want to have an extra string, or at least the ability to make yourself another string. You might want to try warming it up a bit. When we finally put the last bit of wax in, I'll show you how we can do that without any source of flame. You don't, or heat. You do not want to put flame directly on this material. Being a synthetic material, it's going to melt, and it will really weaken the fibers. So the only time you want to put any flame near this is if you are deliberately trying to melt the ends of the string together. Otherwise, some good friction is probably enough. So, getting about halfway to the end here. And see, we've got a really nice, tight loop in here. We're going to tighten that up quite a bit once we have the bow strung, and it'll all smooth out. Right now it really has that kind of lumpy candy cane appearance, and that's going to smooth right out when we get the string done. The nice thing about a Flemish string is that you can shorten the string to some extent, maybe lengthen it a hair, but shorten it by twisting it up once it's on the bow. You really don't want to, if you make one of these too short, they will, especially with this material, stretch a little bit when you're shooting it at first. So it will kind of stretch in, and then you're going to have to tighten it. Because we're doing a single loop string, you can just retie the loop at the end. If you were making a double loop string, then what you would want to do is actually twist the string up, and that will tighten it. So we're at the end. We're just going to tie this off in a little knot. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. We just don't want it to untwist while we're working with it. And you can even leave this on the string, or once the string is set, you could cut it off. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to bring the bow back in here now. Let's set that end over there so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to put my knock here, and we're going to stretch this right out so you can see where we're at. Now we want to be about 3 inches shorter than the length of the bow. So that's going to put us right about here. Okay. And that's where the loop's going to be. So how do you make a loop that's going to hold? Well, you use something called a bowyer's knot, or probably today more commonly called a timber hitch. So a timber hitch or a bowyer's knot is, you start off making that plain old, what do they call it, a square knot, I think. And then all you want to do, so I'm going to do that again, right? It's just a standard, make your loop. Let's go back out here for a second. Make sure we're where we want it to be, about 3 inches short. Right here. That's where we want this loop to be. So we're going to pass over, pass through. Okay. That's where we want it to be. Now, to keep this from unraveling, you're not going to make a knot. You want this to slide a little bit. So we're going to loop this through one more time. Maybe 2 more times is fine. I don't think you'll need more than that. Okay, now this is going to bind in on itself. I'm going to go to the other end, take this loop off and slide it down the bow. And come back to this end and put this knot that we just made right here. We want to tighten it up till it slides on. Now, what we're hoping is once we got our length, we never should have to take this off of the bow anymore. It's always going to happen at the other end. I think I might have slid this a little too far, so let's go take a look at the other end. Well, no, it might be all right. Slightly more than 3 inches, and that's fine. This material likes to stretch, so I'm not too worried about that. Come back to here, tighten that knot up really well. Pull it real tight. Good. Now we need to string the bow. We have our knot tied on this end, and now we're going to string the bow. And these strings stretch quite a bit, so let me put that string in there. Okay. All right, so this string's a little long right now, and that's okay, because that's the beauty of a single loop string, is I can just retie this knot. So I really would like, when this bow is strung, for that string to be up near the tip of my thumb. Okay. One of the things we could do is just twist this string a lot, and that would shorten it. But we would need to twist quite a bit in order to add that much more depth to what's called the brace height. That's the distance from the handle to the string. So what I'm going to do, take that off, and I'm going to take this little loop off over here. We're just going to move it up the bow a bit. Okay. So take this, and I know right now I'm keeping my thumb and forefinger where the loop was. And I know that was not nearly as short as I would like it to be. And there's going to be some difference in every bow. 3 inches is just kind of a good place to start. So I'm going to come probably to about here. That's another 1.5 to 2 inches. We'll remake our bowyer's hitch, or our timber hitch here. We're just going to cross it through. Okay, as I showed you before. And that's just your standard knot. We're going to take this down, and then we're going to run it through itself 1 or 2 more times. Okay, now the part that's sliding is this end. I'm going to put it back on. We're going to tighten it up again. Nice and tight. And we'll restring it and see where we're at. Nice and tight there. Well, that's certainly better. All right, so I'm going to adjust it one more time. This is why we started this far down, so that gave us plenty of play in here. So there's where my loop was. It's still too long, so I'm going to come down about another inch and make our bowyer's knot again. If you try to look up bowyer's knot, you're probably not going to find it. So look up timber hitch if you're unable to follow me in making this knot here. And all this excess string that's hanging out, we can just cut that off later. There we go. Nice and tight. I know a lot of people just leave it hanging out there. It's not going to affect the arrow flight at all. Okay, one more time. Look at that. That's right, what we want right there. Now, this is going to stretch, and that's fine. So one way you can is just to actually stretch it a bit. When you're doing this, make sure you're watching this end. So when you're stretching the string, you know you're stretching it, and you're not just unraveling your knot at the end. It's not sliding, and it's not. You see how much we just lost? Okay, there's quite a bit of stretch in this string. Now what we're going to do is use the more traditional method. We've really tightened this up a lot. So now I'm going to take this end off. We're going to loosen this knot up. And because we've stretched it, it should be nice and tight now. All right, and I'm not going to untie it. All right. In order to shorten this string, rather than move the knot, now what I want to do is tighten the twist. The twist is really going to go into the middle of the string now. So, and I like having this tail, so it allows me to count. I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's 10 or 11 twists. I'm going to put it back on the bow, okay, and come back to this end. There's no need to take the string off the bow because this end is going to help prevent that string from untwisting. You can see there's more twists in our string here. There. And then we're back up, almost to that full, what some places call a fist meal. Stretch that string a bit. We lost a little bit more, so I'm going to twist it one more time. And once you start shooting, it's probably going to stretch a bit more. And so don't move this knot, just take it off and twist it. And if you over twist it, shoot it a few times to see if the stretch takes care of it, but untwist it if you need to. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm only picking 10 so I can remember how many twists I put in. I put 20 twists in at this point, give or take 1 or 2. And there we go. That's nice. I like that there. It's not stretching nearly as much now. Yeah, see it held. So I like that. Longbows like this, especially a self bow, I tend to keep my brace height a little bit low. The higher your brace height, the further the bow has to bend when you draw it, and that's going to put more stress on the bow. We can always add some twists later. It's my beeswax. Now we're going to wax this whole string down before we go any further. We still need to put a serving on it, but for the most part right now you could almost shoot it the way it is. So we're going to really rub some wax, you can see, into this string. Now be careful when you get your beeswax, and you can buy beeswax in many places. You can really get some good beeswax sometimes at a good tool parts store like Woodcraft sells nice chunks of or blocks of beeswax or cups of beeswax. You can get it from any of the suppliers we talked about earlier. Now this part, just rubbing this wax in, this is not enough. This wax is just sitting on the surface. Oh, by the way, never get this dirty. Okay, never get this dirty, because you'll be rubbing grit into your string, and that's going to destroy the string. So now we've got a lot of good wax there. Got a piece of scrap leather, and this is really the key. Now you're going to rub this really hard. And even in leather as thick as this piece I'm using here, you will start to feel the heat right through the leather. Make sure we get the whole thing. These little tail ends don't matter. If you get somebody who is really a professional string maker, they'll make sure that none of these little tails are showing, but that is all aesthetics. It has nothing to do with the end quality of the string. And now you can see how this really smoothed into a nice round string. It no longer has that characteristic of separate bundles. And the more you shoot it, the more it will end up laying in even tighter. what I've done here is clamped the bow gently to the table. We need to have it enough rigidity so that this doesn't move while we're going to add this material called the serving. You can go buy serving in all kinds of colors. So some people like to customize it. This one is clamped down pretty tight. This one is a lot looser. I don't want to really put too much pressure on the bow, just enough so it's not going to move back and forth too much. The serving will hold itself on the bow. So what we want to do is we look here. This is where the arrow is going to pass. And if I wanted to, I could maybe set something right about here to start. And I want to give myself enough leeway so that if the string needs to change length a little bit and shift it, I have enough of the serving to cover my bases here. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to start by wrapping this serving around a couple times, and I'm probably about 3 inches above where the arrow is going to pass. Once I have done this, I am going to take this serving and just pass it down the bow toward the bottom limb. And I'm going to wrap the string over itself a few times. Now this is a serving jig. You could do this all by hand. It would just take a little bit of practice. But this allows it to get really tight. So now I've wrapped this in a few times like this. If you can get in really close here, you can see that these threads are going to be in really, really tight. Okay, you don't want any gapping like that. You want it nice and tight. And then this tool has a tensioner, and all of the string jigs, the different versions you can buy out there, all have tensioners on them. So we want to wind this spool down until the jig touches the string, like that. Okay, and now as I wrap it, okay, it's going to wrap over itself. I'm going to take this excess string here, pull it really tight. And now I'm going to do this. And as I do this, it is adding one more wrap, and it's like a screw. It's just pushing itself down the string. Some people get really fancy and you can jiggle the string and just make it wind. But if you make enough strings, you can play with that technique. I've gone far enough here. You might want to leave this excess string in the bundle. A lot of that has to do with your arrows. So what I'd like to do now is, do you have one of your arrows in here? Here are two of the arrows that Sir Brian would normally shoot from this bow. And we're going to just kind of test the fit of this serving. This nock, in my opinion, I know I've already used the term nock, the ends of the bow where the string sits are also called nocks. And this is the arrow nock, and this is going to sit on the string. This, not too bad, it's a little bit tight. I wouldn't want to go down too low on this. I think I would take a little sandpaper and maybe loosen that nock up a bit. They look a little tight to me. And then these are called snap nocks, and they are literally supposed to click onto the string very gently. And that one doesn't feel too bad. If you aren't sure when you're making your own string, if you know what kind of nocks you have, once again, you could call customer service in Three Rivers or one of those other companies. Tell them what you have and ask them what size this serving should be, because you can buy these in different thicknesses and then customize how tight the fit of your arrow on the string is going to be. I'm feeling that this is a little bit tight right now, so I'm going to take this excess string, because we've already wrapped it in really well, we don't need any of this extra, and I'm going to cut it off. And I'm cutting it off above the point where the arrow is actually going to nock, which is going to be right about here on the string. So I have plenty of room here, and that means that it's going to fit a little better when I get there. So now I have to keep wrapping like I was doing before. Oops, don't want to wrap the wrong way. Good. You want to make sure there's enough tension. If this tool were to just kind of want to fall off of the string, you need to tighten this nut a little bit. You want to have some good tension on the serving. Many people don't like their servings to be too big. I'm one of them. A really long serving ends up just adding unnecessary weight to the string. You wouldn't think it would make a big difference, but it does. It does affect the performance of the string. I like to have just enough serving to make sure that I have a little leeway for my arrow nocks, and that the fingers that I'm going to use to pull the string are all going to be on the serving. If I'm using a tab or a glove, they're a lot more likely, those tools, to get dirty or wet or sweaty or whatever, and I don't want that material rubbing into the strands of my string. I don't care if they get into the serving itself, because I can replace this if it gets dirty or worn. Alright, so I'm in a pretty good position there. This is where the arrow would sit, right about here. If I'm shooting Mediterranean style, I have plenty of room for a finger above. I have some room for fingers below. I'm going to add another 10 wraps. 7, 6, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now we have to finish this off. So I'm going to pull a lot of extra thread out here. And I am going to make a loop, because I want this material to wrap in on itself. So I am going to lay it here. And I have this big open area. So what's going to happen here is, when I continue to wrap this, I want this side to unwrap. So if I do this and wrap around, pull that out a little bit. You can see as I do this, when I wrap this side's going to unwrap. You see that? All right, so I'm going to do 10 to 15 wraps here. So that's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. Okay, now I'm going to take this, and I like to leave it on the jig. Some people like to cut it off, but the jig gives it a little weight. So you see I just laid this in over the string, and so when I wrap, I'm going to wrap right over that piece of string. And as I wrap this side is going to unwrap. And you want to keep good tension on this, right? Don't over pull it, because you won't be able to slide this out. But you want a good firm tension. Make sure that's nice and tight. You see how it's unwrapping over here? And there we go. We're totally unwrapped. And now we're just going to pull this through. Make sure you keep your fingers on it. Otherwise, you're going to have a bird's nest at the end here. Pull it through, right up. Pull it nice and tight. Now, leave a little of this material. When you cut it, don't cut it super tight. Leave, I don't know, 1/4 inch or so. This is the one time you're going to put your flame near your string. Oops, dropped my lighter. So you can see this little tail here. I don't know if you can see that. Right there, sticking out. We want to melt that. And by melting it and smearing it into the string, that means that it can't come unraveled. We're almost done. We're almost done here. Now, I expected this to happen. The bow is under tension. And I'm going to release this over here. If I can figure out how to release this clamp. There we go. And if I go back up here, I've lost about 1/4 to 1/2 inch. And that's fine. I can still twist this up later on. I don't need to do that right at the moment. But what I do need to figure out is where I want to put, I like to put a little indicator on the string. Some people, especially with modern bows, would use a piece of metal that crimps on. And that's fine, especially if you're using modern strings that don't stretch too much. I like to use a tie-on method with another piece of thread. You can use some of your bowstring. Very common for people to use nylon dental floss. Cotton is really great because you can add a dab of glue to the cotton later on, and that will keep it from unwinding. But I'm going to use what I have here, and I'm going to take this off for the moment just so we can see how I'm going to do this. So I'm going to put the arrow on, and contrary to what you might think, you don't really want this arrow to be perpendicular to the string, or I should say, maybe more importantly, the arrow shaft itself should not be parallel to the ground. You want the arrow to be about a ½ inch above that straight line. There are special tools for this called string tees, but we don't really need that. If you have your tape measure, you can set your arrow in there where you want to shoot. Go straight off of that. Okay, and be right about there. Right now I am just about a ½ inch above, which is where I like it. So I want to tie a little knot just above that arrow nock. So I'm going to do that right here. It fell off, that's fine. But I don't want it to move because this is where I'd like it to be. The nice thing about this kind of nock is I can move it later on. If I find I don't like my arrow flight. So let's see where that's going to sit. Oh, just came loose. So try this again. I'm going to clamp it. I'm just going to stand. That's where the arrow would pass. You want to be about a ½ inch above, right about there. Yep. So what I'm going to do is pull that tight. Now the first knot is under the string. I'm going to make the second knot over the string. And then I'm going to do the same technique I used with this. I am going to wrap the string through, so one, make sure I have enough string here, which side is longer. There. And I don't need to do 12 this time. I don't have enough string for that anyway. So let's go 1, 2, probably 6 to 8 would be plenty for this. 3. I'm holding it on with my thumb. 4, 5. There's 6. And what I'm going to do, oops, just lost one. There. I'm going to hold it over, just like we did before when I had the jig hanging down, and I'm going to take this string and go in the other direction. And now I'm just going to unwrap it. So I want to go this way. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6. And I'm going to pull this one through. This is where you might want a pair of pliers. If you don't have one, just make sure you pull it nice and tight. And I do have my little multi-tool here. Pull that nice and tight. And what this is going to do, I'm going to tie this off. Just like before, don't cut the string flush because we're going to want to melt this. Finish up with one more knot here. The string is fighting me today. There. So let's leave a little bit of extra on both pieces. Melt them. There. So this knot, because this is a spiral, and we can turn it up and down the string to change the position. So now, stay in nice and tight on that. When I put my arrow on, I want my arrow nock to be under that indicator. And that indicator is a little lower than I want it. If you take a look here, you can see that the arrow is almost parallel to the ground. So what I want to do is just twist it. And I can twist it up the string until I get it to the position I want it. If you do this with a metal nock, there's a special pair of pliers that you can use to take the metal nock off and then reset it. Right, and it's moving up a little bit. And if it isn't laying in the way you want, just cut it off. That's a little bit better there. You can see it's a little higher. And that's about where you want when you're going to draw.
All right, so awesome.
There we go. We got a nice new string on here.
Yep.
You know, we've got our single loop up top and nice knot on the bottom. You can cut this excess off if you want. I wouldn't bother with it, but you can. If you do, make sure you tie the knot up a little further.
Yeah, I may leave it.
You know, and
I like the look of that.
We've got our arrow indicator, and I think there you go.
Awesome, yeah. Awesome. And we hope you really enjoyed this video, folks, and we will be putting more out along the lines for archery and so forth with Master Marcus in the future. So along that lines, please look down below and hit that like and subscribe button to stay up to date with our latest videos. And we hope you have a good day.
Yep. Have a good one.